Well, I'm sad that this is the last assignment of the course, but I'm also pumped to close out the class with a final TED Talk here on one of my favorite topics, which you can see as we explore what Sora thought this was going to look like. Today, we're going to talk about trust. And I know this is a topic that has weaved its way through our coursework with you in 565. It's also come up in 591. I'm assuming that it's going to continue to come up throughout the all of our time in the course and into our professional world in AI. So today I'm going to deep dive into all things communicating trust, what it means. We're going to explore from a few different lenses. So from a personal lens, from a professional lens through a couple of different levels. And then I'm going to talk at the end about maybe where some additional research can be done on this topic, as we know that things are pretty new and continuing to evolve. So let's kick off with exploring what trust in AI means, and I'll see you on the other side. So communicating trust, what does it even mean? What does it look like? So as we know from our time together in class here, and I love the way that Sora put this together for our visual, machines are predicting, humans are deciding. Thinking about trust and communicating trust, what would those elements look like? We would look for things like clear and visible sources. We would look like guardrails and ownership, who's doing what, who's assigned to what. And again, we're going to explore all of these elements from their most fundamental level at personal, all the way through the various rungs of the professional world. So thinking now that we've defined what trust looks like, what some of the elements are, thinking about what that bridge might look like to take us from communicating trust to actually having trust in the AI. Because as we know, good models still fall flat. And really, I see communication as the bridge from output to an actual decision. So if we think about this idea of a black box, so of things being opaque, can't see through them, there is no transparency, very, very hard to make decisions from that output, even if it's good output. The answer to that second bullet is what I'm saying is artifacts. So it both reduces overtrust, so we're not just implicitly trusting the model, but it also reduces the undertrust, those skeptics like me and like all of us, I think, wondering, can I actually trust what I'm getting from the model? I'm going to anchor us in a little bit of a case study. And so Compass, this study showed, and we've actually seen this come up in a couple of discussion boards, how the courts used bias and how bias came up in court predictions and in some of their decisions. And so without transparency or oversight, we're never going to have trust from the public in our models, in our output, in our decisions. And so really, as we're thinking about communication as this bridge, as trust, thinking about how we make sure that we can anchor in oversight and in transparency, which will ultimately lead to people trusting us and trusting our decisions and our outputs. So next, let's take a look from a personal lens. What does this trusting in AI look like? So first, trusting in outputs. Talking about these little micro artifacts. These first came up in my last TED Talk on how to overcome hallucinations in prompt engineering. So when we think about this, want to think about layered answers. And so when I'm asking, even from a personal perspective, generative AI to do something for me, I want to know that I have the claim, the evidence, the caveats, the next steps. These were all part of our best practices in terms of prompt engineering last week. Also that came up is this idea of provenance. I'm starting to get this word in my vocabulary because it comes up often with AI and generative AI. So making sure that we're asking and finding out where these sources are coming from, when was the information that it's providing to us last updated. And as I shared last week, I do this often with AI. I ask it how confident it is. I actually tell it to go blow things up and put it back together again and make sure that it is actually confident in what it's giving me. And so last, to anchor us here again, another case study, I thought this was really interesting. So the National Business Bureau of Economic Research did a workplace study where they found that less experienced workers saw the biggest productivity lift when their output was paired with citations or guardrails, and just showing that trust mechanics matter most for anybody that's newer. And so that makes sense. If you think about it, correlation does not equal causation. We know that. If you're a newer employee, you're probably going to be looking, or if you're even in a personal setting where you're newer to an organization or some sort of volunteering thing that you're doing. You're just going to be more hypersensitive to wanting to do things right, making sure you're monitoring yourself. And so you're probably going to be not only giving them output, but you're also going to be bringing them where and why you got things from that as well. So one more stop on our personal tour, thinking about some habits that we can take into trusting AI, building trust with AI. I thought this was a fun representation from Sora of how we are actually monitoring as humans and making decisions still with the outputs. So one of the habits is really thinking about drafts, not decisions. And so what comes from generative AI is a draft. So it's something I'm reviewing, something I'm iterating, it's something I'm going back and forth with. Also, the second bullet, I think, is one of the most important, as we're going to see in the case study in a second. So one of these habits is really naming the owner and the reviewer. This will come up a lot more in the corporate setting, but also if you think about this from a personal accountability, even if it's just you, are you clear that you're really the one that owns the actions and the next steps and all that? If you're working with somebody else, if it's a friend of yours or a family member, who's the ultimate decision maker and the owner and all that, just really is going to be very, very helpful to understand. And also, again, thinking about these drafts, not decisions. What are you checking? Are you identifying what you had to review, why you stopped it, what the gate was, so that you can help generative AI learn for next time and do better for you? So the case study anchor that we're bringing in today, 2018, was a self-driving test from Uber. Clear lack of human responsibility here. And so it was really interesting that throughout all of the different people that were involved in this project, there was no clear delineated person who was designated as the final person to hit the stop button and turn the car off. And so after various things happened that led to the car needing to be stopped, no one having ownership over that, it not stopping and unfortunately killing somebody. So again, from a personal perspective, we all want to be able to get around and do our life and do our thing. We want to make sure that people are, clearly accountable and own their jobs and what they're doing, and make sure that we're not being impacted like that. But also just a really clear way to say we need to make sure that we understand what's going on, what AI is giving us, and also that we know who owns what and what is happening. So next, let's take it. Now that we talked a little bit about the workplace, actually into the workplace. So if you think about it from an individual contributor standpoint, trusting in AI, we're really going to be thinking more like trusting through review. And so when we think about review, this lands well into our graduate studies, into the academic world, because if you think about what Sora has depicted here for us is actually a peer being reviewed all around them, which I think this pretty much accurately depicts it in my world. So for this associate, building trust through review, we're thinking about briefs, chains of thought. These are things we also talked about in prompt engineering last week. Thinking about maps of reasoning and evidence, we want to make sure that we're able to clearly delineate and help other people understand, just like AI helped us understand where it got the information, so that they can come back and make recommendations or poke holes in it like we would want. So think about decision briefs, or think about source maps. The anchor we're going to bring in here, so there was a study done measuring turnaround times on teams that were using structured AI briefs, as we were mentioning. So they found that these teams moved 25 to 35% faster while avoiding more red lines and not having to review as often. And so really, thinking about how they were doing better work quicker with fewer errors. And also I would wager, and this isn't part of the study, but the culture was probably better on that team because they're feeling really good about that too. They can wag their tail a little bit and say, hey, look at what we're doing. Really great use case for how we can build trust and also build operational efficiency through generative AI at the associate level. So last from this lens is really thinking about trust in data. We've been talking about this a lot in our other class in 591. And I was laughing about this actually in terms of everything that we just spent last week talking about data visualization in Python. So even though my chart is colorful here, you'll notice it's still sorted meaningfully. I don't have rainbow palettes. It was cute that the Sora actually left in my maroon header still. We wanted to highlight, this is just a hypothetical example here, so just highlighting this number 47 for whatever reason. We chose gold because it was offset real nice against the blue. And also really thinking about this idea of shifting away from discovery to synthesis. So meaning that we're not just searching for information anymore. We're not just communicating information back to people. We're communicating concepts. We're searching for understanding. Charts, data analysis, and the way that we just talked through it and building trust through the data will help us ultimately to communicate better as well. So here, that information about the synthesis actually came from a great Wall Street Journal article, and it was actually talking in regards to Google searches and really making sure, since we're moving to synthesis, making sure that we have the provenance. We love this word now. Making sure that that's built into their searches, but also bringing that forward to our trust and data through our charts. We want to make sure that we're actually proving and showing people where this came from. All right, so let's check in real quick. We're at the midway, where we've been, where we're going. We talked about trust in AI, building trust, building bridges. We've looked at it through the lens of kind of more of a personal life. We've looked at it more of the individual contributor and the associate. We've talked about things like provenance, briefs, maps, and charts. We have these great artifacts that really help, again, in our personal life, maybe if we're doing individual work. But now we're going to build on those and bring them into more of the managerial level and the enterprise level, thinking about the playbooks, the accountability, the oversight, change notes, things like that, maybe at that next rung of how we're going to build on what we talked about. So let's dive in. So as I spent many a year in corporate management, and I'm always thinking about managing up and down, trusting and execution is always top of mind. So thinking about what those standardized behaviors are, I'm always thinking about playbooks. What are the accountability maps? Who owns what? What's the RACI look like? And in this case, when we start to talk about bringing AI in or trust in AI, have we defined clearly where humans are still in the loop? And so we'll see that come up. Love how Sora did our video for us of AI and humans being in the loop together. This was really fun. This was a first pass, actually. Only had to ask her to do it once. So again, from a manager perspective, building this trust in AI and building this trust in execution, thinking about playbooks, I felt like this was just basic business 101, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. So having your objective, your inputs, your do's, your don'ts, your HITLs, so your human in the loop thresholds. And what I was taking away from this playbook and why I thought it was just kind of a duh moment is you just need to clearly define and operationalize what it is you and your team and your expectations are of everything else that's going on around you. And that would include this accountability map. And I think, this always served me very, very well in my corporate world. And I learned this lesson the hard way of not having these things and then having, to go back and have to explain things to people and to tell them, oh my gosh, I have no idea who was supposed to do this or I was or whatever. You never want to have that come up in the workplace. So also thinking about that ProPublica case again shows us why playbooks and having humans in the loop are so important. So if we think about the decision biases and what can go into any of those court settings, and really making sure that there is a standard operating procedure and that the courts and that the legal systems have, provenance in their world as well, but also a standard way that they are working with cases and how they are resolving things. All right, so last in the managerial world, thinking about trusting people, because we're obviously managing people. So what are we coaching to? How are we mitigating issues? How are we celebrating things? So instantly came to mind, again, this is more from our data visualization class, thinking about a dashboard, right? So how many issues do we have coming in? How many things coming through generative AI do we have come in? How many were okay? How many got flagged? And I was just thinking about this from like a Monday stand-up kind of situation where we would be, I'd be broadcasting this to the team, bring up weekly wins and reversals. The reversal, I think, is a really great way because you actually have the associate or the team that's responsible for it bring back what their learning was and why, and teach for us, teach back instead of having to have the manager, me, go back and say, this is exactly what happened. I think that's a really nice way to, one, not make people feel bad, and two, build a really great team full of people who want to learn and do better. Also, human in the loop, also thinking about that constantly here, where humans, are we flexing? Are we agile enough? And really, how are we understanding where humans should be in the loop and what does that process look like? So last but not least, we've talked about ourselves. We've talked about working in the workplace. We've talked about managing in the workplace. Let's talk about the organization itself. So trusting things at scale from the enterprise lens, we're thinking about cards, canvases, change notes, transparency for leaders. I also have to call out, this was a great picture from Sora, first time all the words were done right. I didn't ask her to do that, so nice job, included the whole thing anyway. So from a leader perspective, trusting at scale, trusting AI, I'm going to want to know the purpose, the data lineage, the limits. How were these things, like how did you get to these results? Where did they come from? I also, as a leader, want to know about risk. So what does that canvas and threshold look like? As a top leader, I would also want to know, who are the teams, where are we mitigating risk and how's that being handled? What do the overrides look like? What do the review gates look like? and ultimately, what do the change notes look like so that we can keep track of what's going on? And again, from that Bureau of Economic Research study where they found the novices were gaining a lot from all these kind of ad hoc, adjacencies, but also thinking through that the teams need to be aligned as to why, and it actually will keep them from having reoccurring issues downstream, which builds further operational efficiency. So last but not least, for the enterprise, trusting AI through feedback. So closing the loop. We want to make sure, again, we have provenance at the enterprise level through these ledgers, through by being able to mitigate repeat incidents. I thought this was really cool. I'm going to play the video first. I did not ask it to do this. It started with prevent at the front, which was great. And then we have humans and AI working together to prep for the non-human interactions of the future. And so thinking about provenance here. Also, we talked a little bit about this last week in the prompt engineering talk, that we're thinking more like software engineers. So how are we watermarking if it's feasible? How are we labeling things? Really, how are we tracking and monitoring is what we're looking for here. Through that outcome ledger, are we clearly labeling what the decision was, what the impact was, and then what the learning was as a result of it? Again, I thought that was just kind of corporate business 101, but really kind of grounding all of us in basics, I guess, if that's not the case. Thinking about this as a best practice, whether it's for AI or not, or anything. Also anchoring us here in this another Wall Street Journal study, or article rather, billions of machine customers are already making purchases, is what this article was about. So you have all these purchases happening, you have this economic activity happening. And so again, thinking about it from a ledger or provenance standpoint, that demands auditable traces, right? So if you have machines making purchases, do we have the right traces in place? Do we have the right proof in place? Do we have the right ledgers in place to ultimately make people feel comfortable with that? Because even as I'm sharing that with you right now, it makes me feel a little queasy inside to think about machines making purchases for me. But who knows? Maybe by the end of the semester, we'll be there too. So, all right, bringing it home. So talking about today, trusting communication in AI and how to build and bridge trust in AI through these various ways. I know we're building a couple of questions. I just built kind of from each of the lenses that we looked through today. So from a personal perspective, do those provenance lines that we put in, reduce the overtrust for novices like we found, and if they do, the action would be to continue to add provenance lines or to evolve them. From that associate or that individual contributor level, do the briefs that they're using, cut the review time without adding further delays. And if so, keep shipping those decision briefs, evolve that process if needed. From a managerial perspective, do the gates catch more severe errors than the fixed sampling? So are they able to catch quicker and better and more impactful errors? And if so, make sure that that playbook is published and continuing to evolve as well. From an enterprise level, do these cards and change notes and all this other, are we able to reduce the reoccurrences and really make marketplace shifts? And if so, continue to evolve that process as well. So really excited about this idea of communication and trust and building trust and bridges through AI. We built in each of the research questions today. They link back with the compass bias, the Uber crash, provenance erosion, which also shows that building each of these tools in and measuring the effectiveness and having these artifacts is going to be critical not only to AI adoption for the future, but also to continue evolution in the workplace. So really excited about this class. Thanks for listening, and see you on the other side.